On September 22nd, I, along with, I believe, all staff in the township, received an email from HR requiring us to complete what they called a vaccine survey. This was done through SurveyMonkey, I believe. And it was a mandatory survey requiring people to share whether or not they're vaccinated, or basically that was it. And that same email invited people to share any questions or concerns that one might have about that survey. I took HR up on that offer and gave them a fairly lengthy and detailed email outlining some of the questions I had and some of the concerns I had. Chief among my questions, I suppose, was under what authority the township requires this data from us, and also a number of questions regarding what they would do to safeguard what I believe is private medical information. And HR did give me a response. It was a relatively perfunctory response, frankly. And other than citing Section 25 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, most of my questions were largely unanswered and largely ignored. I sent a second email just reiterating some of my questions and clarifying some of my points, again on September 22nd, and I've yet to receive a response from that email. One of the things that HR shared was the purpose of that survey was for them to develop what was called a vaccine strategy. Now, more recently, on October 6th, I received, again along with all staff as far as I know, I received an email with a large attachment from our Chief Administrative Officer requiring us to share our proof of vaccine with Human Resources. And the policy reads in part, this program is in line with public health guidance and supports the directive that vaccines provide a high-level protection against the COVID-19 virus, related variants, and associated side effects, and will require employees, volunteers, students, and contractors to provide proof of full vaccination against COVID-19, and should an additional COVID-19 dose or booster be required in accordance with public health guidelines, proof of its administration will be required. And they also talk about, for medical reasons, you can opt out. I think that's the only reason, is for medical reasons. And if you opt out through medical reasons, you have to take their re-education program, complete a COVID-19 educational program and demonstrate a negative result. So I'm making this video for a few reasons. One, because my email of September 2nd has gone largely unanswered. I thought I'd try a different medium here. Two, also just to let the township know that I will not be providing my proof of vaccination. And three, just to walk you through some of my reasons for choosing not to provide it. So there's three main reasons why I won't provide my proof of vaccine. The first one is it runs contrary to the fundamental rights and freedoms that citizens should be able to enjoy in a free country. This includes the freedom of conscience to make one's own decisions about what one believes or doesn't believe, and within reason to live by those convictions. Second, even if you don't buy that argument, if ever a government could require a mandatory vaccine, which I deny, it certainly is not the jurisdiction of a municipal government. And lastly, the program itself is not reasonable. And I mean that in sort of both senses of the word. It's not reasonable as in it's not fair and sensible, and it's not reasonable in that it doesn't follow sort of logical conventions. So I'll walk through each of these. So first, as part of our tradition in the West, in the British Commonwealth, perhaps especially, there is this idea of individual human rights that despite governments or kings in a bygone era, that individuals are afforded certain rights. And I mentioned things like freedom of conscience to decide what you believe and to be unfettered from unreasonable interference by one's government. Along those lines, I believe that we have the choice to decide what to do with our bodies insofar as it affects us and doesn't affect other people. What I choose to put into my body or not put into my body is my choice, And no government or employer or municipality can require that I put anything in my body, even if that thing is clearly benign. If someone wants to require that I drink some water, water is certainly not harmful. I don't deny that, but I do deny that a government or employer has the right to require that I drink water. And along those lines, in terms of rights, I believe we have the right to medical privacy. Part of our work requires that we have DZ licenses to drive these trucks. They're inherently more dangerous than a passenger car. They're heavier, and perhaps harder to control at times. They have air brakes. So the Ministry of Transportation requires, I think every 3 years or so, that we visit our doctor, that our doctor asks us a number of health questions, and then the doctor provides the ministry his or her opinion as to our fitness to drive these vehicles. So certainly the township and the fire department has a right, I believe, to require that I have a DZ license, but they don't have a right to know the underlying things that my doctor may have looked at, including my levels of stress, my blood pressure, my cholesterol level, my body mass index. Those types of things are between me and my doctor, and the doctor gets to decide whether I'm medically fit to drive one of these vehicles. So that's just an example of where, because we hold medical information as private and personal, we take lengths to separate the employer from the personal information. With this proof of vaccine, we violate that fundamental belief. I deny that governments have the right to provide proof of vaccine, mandatory vaccines, but even if they did, it certainly would not be vested with a municipal government. And perhaps here the municipal government is acting as an employer. In HR's email, they cited Section 25(2)H, I believe, of the Occupational Health and Safety Act of Ontario, which I'm paraphrasing here, but it basically requires an employer to do everything reasonable under the circumstances to ensure the safety of a worker. And I think what HR was saying is requiring proof of vaccines is a reasonable, under those circumstances, it would be reasonable to require them for the safety of other people. And that ties in with my last point, and that is it misses the reasonability test, that it is not a reasonable requirement. From my memory, we were able to get our vaccines around April or May. The COVID numbers were much higher then. The general population had a lower vaccination rate and the case count was higher. Yet here we would go out and do our best to help members of the public. If it's a motor vehicle collision or a fire or a medical emergency, we would respond. And the township at that point didn't say that it was unsafe for us to go out. They seemed appreciative that we would go out and serve the community despite there being a risk. So now vaccines are much more prevalent in the population and the case numbers are down. So certainly the risk of being unvaccinated now is lower than it was, say, in April or May. Yet HR is saying that they're obligated under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to require vaccines. So if they require them now, if it's a reasonable thing for them to do now and to not do it, they'd be in violation of the Act, it sounds like, then that would mean they must have been in violation of the Act earlier when the case count was higher and they didn't require vaccines. So clearly Section 25 is not applicable here. It's not a reasonable requirement. And along those lines, the logic of these vaccines mandates don't make sense. The blurb I read there said that that vaccines provide a high level of protection against the COVID-19 virus. Either the vaccines are generally effective or generally ineffective. If they are effective, and my brother and sister who's next to me in the fire truck, let's suppose they don't have a vaccine, and I do, because the vaccine's effective, their choice not to get vaccinated is not harming me because we know the vaccines are generally largely effective. If you say they're not effective, well, then the question is, why would you require that one take a vaccine that is ineffective? As far as I know, through this whole pandemic, we've had 1, 2, maybe 3 cases here that I know of. Certainly no outbreak. As far as I know, these were individual cases that occurred elsewhere. And because we had protocols in place, things didn't spread. We were able to serve the community despite the danger out there. And that takes me, I guess, to my closing point. Part of our business in the fire service is assessing risk. We have a saying that we will risk a lot if there's a chance to save a lot, and we will risk little if there's a chance to only save a little. And I think that ties in with what's missing here in a risk assessment. We could ask, is it safe to get in one of these trucks and drive down the highway? Would it be safer to get in the truck and drive down the highway or to stay put? Would it be safer to stop at the side of a busy highway, or would it be safer to move on? Would it be safer to go into an environment where there's smoke and heat and other unpredictable elements, or would it be safer not to? Clearly, if you look at those questions, it would be safer for us never to leave the fire hall. But of course, we do leave the fire hall, because what we're doing is we're asking ourselves, is it worth the risk to get in one of these trucks to go help a member of the community if they've rolled their vehicle and they're stuck in a ditch? We will risk our own lives. We risk the health and safety of other people in the community as we drive these trucks. We do our best to be as careful as we can, but they're inherently dangerous. There's inherent risk in what we do, yet we see that there's something more important. That is the citizen who needs help, someone who's in distress, someone whose property is on fire, or whose health and safety is in peril. So it's not about whether or not we take risks, but it's balancing those risks with the costs associated with them. So technically, I guess if we require proof of vaccine, I guess on some technical level, things will be a little bit safer, but we have to ask at what cost? Are not civil liberties and freedoms of conscience and to decide one's own choice when it comes to vaccine, are those not important enough to be risking maybe a little bit to preserve these fundamental rights? And is it not worthwhile to risk a little bit to preserve the rights of people to keep their status private? For these reasons, I will not be submitting my proof of vaccine. And as long as you'll allow me, I'll continue to answer the call when the pager goes off, and I'll do my best with my brothers and sisters to serve our community. And if you want to stop me from doing that, I know that that might be a consequence, but until that time, I'll do my best to faithfully serve this community. Thank you.